Okay, welcome back. We're on the second half of chapter 4, and we're moving from the biology to the psychology to the sociology of crime. So we've covered biology, both the historical approach to biology and also the more modern approaches to biology. And now we're going to move to psychology and crime, and we're going to start with one of the most noted psychological approaches to crime, and that's Freud and psychoanalytical theory. So before we jump there, let's take a look at the types of crimes we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about psychoanalytic. We're going to talk about moral development. We're going to talk about attachment theory, social learning theory, and then lastly, very briefly, personality and crime. All right. So psychoanalytic theory. This is from um, our good friend, Mr. Freud. It's based on Freudian concepts of id, ego, and superego. There are three basic components, three basic components of psychoanalytic theory. Number one is that crime is caused by an overbearing conscience or guilt about something. Two is that crime is caused by a weak conscience. And three, and I think most importantly, what we learn and take the most from psychoanalytic theory is the idea that crime is caused by the need for immediate gratification. And this is a theme that will reemerge in many of the criminological theories we talk about the rest of this semester. This is Freud's great contribution to understanding antisocial behavior, in particular crime, and that is the need for immediate gratification. What is immediate gratification? Inability to put off rewards and do the hard work. Okay, so you guys are in college and you're really doing great. I mean, you're in particular, you think about it, you're just adapting to this new way of teaching college because of the COVID-19 virus. So what are you doing? You are putting off immediate rewards in order to have a better paying job and a family and the ability to send your kids to good schools and colleges somewhere down the road. Okay? That is deferred gratification, the ability to put off rewards to a later point in life. Freud argued that criminals did not have the ability to defer gratification, but needed to have it immediately. And that leads to people doing crazy things and committing criminal acts like, hey, let's go out and steal this car, or let's get drunk and go down to the bar and see what happens. None of these things lead to good. Okay. Second is the theory of inadequate moral development. It has some interesting ideas as well. Take a look here. Developed by a guy named Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg argues that our moral reasoning develops in three phases. It develops in what's called the pre-conventional phase, and this is when you're a little kid and you learn the do's and don'ts. Don't touch that. Yes, you may have that. Yes, you may play with that. No, that's your brother's. Don't touch that. You know, you learn, remember these days, you were a little kid, you know, way pre-adolescent. And then you, at some point in your life, you hit a stage of moral development when you learn to adopt societal norms. And that typically happens once you hit school. Because what is school? School, well, you learn how to read and how to write and how to do math and, you know, all the other good mechanical stuff you learn in school. How to, you know, diagram sentences, social studies, civics, you know, all that stuff. But what you also really learn in school is how to follow rules and understanding the consequences when you violate a rule. It is the first time in your life many people are faced with a sanction that wasn't administered by their parents. So if you're in school and you're not supposed to get out of your seat, but you get out of your seat, you're going to get in trouble. So I remember when my son was in kindergarten and elementary school at Spring Valley out in Midway. And if he got in trouble, he got what was called a color change. And you didn't want to get a color change because you had to go home and tell your parents, yeah, I got a color change. Well, what'd you get the color change for? Well, teacher didn't understand that no, what'd you get the color change for? Well, I got out of my seat when I wasn't supposed to. Okay. So that color change represented a sanction that he got from a non-parental figure. This is from his teacher, from his kindergarten teacher. And my son got a lot of color changes when he was in kindergarten or first grade. He's doing really well now, but in that first couple of years, he really got a lot of color changes. But it's in school where you sort of learn conventional moral development. You learn what the rules are, what to follow them. You try to avoid getting in trouble. And then the post-conventional age of development is kind of where you guys are really kind of at that now. You're living by a personal ethical code or a set of principles that you've developed from your moral reasoning since early childhood. What Kohlberg argues is that criminals tend to reason at a very low or pre-conventional level. They really tend to not quite understand the consequences of breaking rules, or that the idea that rules apply to them. And so it's not unusual to see people who have clearly been caught doing something wrong create this whole system of deniability. No, that wasn't wrong. You guys are wrong. Or, you don't understand. No, you're misinterpreting the law. That's not what I did. And so I can see where this idea comes from. All right, let's move on to one of my favorites, and that is weak attachment theory. Weak attachment theory is it's a really interesting idea. So at the individual level with weak attachment theory, the basic idea is that people who don't form strong attachment to others, like their parents and their teachers and other people that are important in their lives, are much more likely to be criminals. We're going to see this idea come up again and again throughout the rest of the semester. And so what psychology and weak attachment tries to do is it studies children, and it tries to figure out how they learn to form attachments, because psychologists believe that these attachments early in life will either set you on a path towards good behavior or bad behavior. Okay? And so it's early life attachments that predict success in later life. So there's an entire field of education psychology that's based on this idea. And it's a really good one. And it's the idea that students who form strong attachments to teachers, and those teachers who in turn take an interest with attachments to those students, tend to have much higher levels of in terms of academic achievement, i.e. going to college, good SAT scores, graduating from college, etc., than people who don't have strong attachments and don't have good attachments to their teachers and other important people in their lives. So Bowlby is the name of the guy who sort of come up with this idea, and he has 7 different characteristics, and they're in your textbook. You can take a glance at them. He talks about specificity, duration, engagement of emotion, ontogeny, learning, and organization of biological function. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this theory because we're going to come back. I'm more interested in it in the way that it informs the sociological theories we're going to talk about. But I still think weak attachment is a really good idea. And I am a firm believer that we form attachments to others and we bond with them. And to the extent that we bond with people and attach to them, it affects how we interact with them, and it affects our behavior in the sense that you don't want to disappoint people to whom you have strong attachments, which is one of the things that causes people to make the right choices, or to make good choices. Because not only do they not want to get in trouble themselves, but they don't want to disappoint these others in their lives. And this is a very important idea in the social psychology, the sociology/psychology of deviance in behavior. All right. So not surprisingly, attachment ideas are something that are going to reoccur in the sociological theories we talk about in the next few chapters. Next, another good theory, Social learning theory. And basically, I love learning theory because it starts with the simple idea that you as an individual learn how to behave. There's nothing really innate in you that causes you to be a good child or a bad child. You learn good behavior, you learn bad behavior, you learn the consequences of choosing one over the other. So, learning theory makes the argument that delinquent behavior, bad behavior, is learned through the same processes as any other behavior. How do you learn to be a good kid? You also learn to be a bad kid. How many of you remember who B.F. Skinner was? He was a psychologist, and what did he do? You know, he had his whole theory of operant conditioning, and he basically, ran experiments that proved that, reinforcement, positive reinforcement, tends to lead to behavior. When behavior is learned and when it is reinforced or rewarded. Okay, behavior is learned when it is reinforced or rewarded. So in the Skinner box, it was the pigeons hitting the button to get the food pellet. Okay, same thing. If you reward behavior, whether it's good behavior or bad behavior, if you reward it, it will be repeated. Now, how do we learn behavior? Well, we learn it in many different ways. And we learn it through we learn it through our interactions with others. And we talk about this as differential association. So it kind of depends on the type of people you hang out with and you associate with. So if you associate with good people, then your behavior that fits their expectations of behavior, i.e. good behavior, is going to get rewarded. Okay? I mean, they're not going to hand you a food pellet like B.F. Skinner did to the pigeons, but the behavior will be rewarded. If you behave badly in a group of people that expect good behavior, you'll get rewarded, you'll get sanctioned. That behavior is inappropriate. If you're going to hang out with us, you can't behave like that. We'll go out with you, can come out with us, but you can't be drinking that much like you did the last time we went out. Otherwise, you're going to have to find a different group of people to hang out with. That's the idea of how behavior is learned. So essentially, there are three modes through which behavior is learned. Number one is observational learning. Number two is through direct experience. And number three is through differential reinforcement. Okay? Observational learning, direct experience, and differential reinforcement. What is observational learning? All right, so how do we learn through observation? It's through mimicry. Children learn behavior through mimicry. How do we learn I teach this in an intro class. Gender roles are typically learned through mimicry. Okay? So little girls dress up like mommy and have tea parties with their stuffed dolls, etc. They're learning a set of gender roles. Okay? Little boys dress up and play cowboys and Indians or football or whatever. They're learning a gender role. The male gender, it's danger, excitement, and toughness. Okay? These are gender. Not saying whether it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that that's what happens. Children learn through mimicry. Well, how do they learn to be criminals? Well, they tend to draw upon family, friends and acquaintances, and of course, ever increasingly, entertainment, the media. So if you grow up in a household where violence is normative, it's something that happens pretty often, chances are you're going to think there's nothing wrong with violence. If you hang out with people who think deviant behavior is okay, especially at that young vulnerable age, that awkward age, in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I don't know where you guys went to school, but where I went to school, and that was the first time in my life I really had experienced, I could observe good behavior and bad behavior in my classmates. Where I went to school at Wallace Middle School in Charleston, South Carolina, there was the bad kids would smoke at school. And it was illegal to smoke. And if they got caught, they'd get suspended. But they would sneak off to way in the back of the school, behind the building, and they would smuggle their cigarettes back there and smoke. And, you know, if you were going to be one of those cool kids, you had to go back there and you had to bring cigarettes and you had to share it and you had to smoke. And I didn't do these things. But it was for the first time in my life that I noticed, wow, there are these bad kids and they're doing these bad things and they think they're really cool about it. And, you know, they're gaining a reputation as being, frankly, kind of problem kids. And then the last is entertainment. So kids learn to mimic and through the cartoons that they watch, through the television they watch, through the video games that they play. I mean, there's some, you know, I don't. I mean, you know, you go back and look at the old school Bugs Bunny videos, pretty dang violent, actually. And so when my kids, when I was a kid, when I was this age, you know, I was born in 1964. So in the late 60s, it was, you know, 1968 was a summer of love, and you know, we were in a hippie drug culture at the time. And then along comes a cartoon in the middle of this culture that children loved called Scooby-Doo. People still love Scooby-Doo today. But think about what the parents were thinking in the 1960s. Their kids are watching this cartoon on Saturday mornings that involved a van with a bunch of teenagers. They had a talking dog. They always had the munchies, wanting the Scooby snacks. So there's like 4 references to marijuana right there. All right, and then in the movies later on in the 90s and the 2000s, my son watched those movies. And he was a little kid, and the double entendres in there were hysterical. So, you know, Shaggy's girlfriend was named Mary Jane, and so for those of you who don't know that, Mary Jane was a euphemism for marijuana back in the 1960s. So, you know, the whole idea was that that children mimicked the entertainment they see, and by watching, you know, these cartoons or watching Scooby-Doo and this pro-drugs, you know, culture, riding around in that van, and God knows what they're smoking in there, and the talking dog is a sign of LSD, and that was going to create a whole culture of drug addicts. Well, it didn't. Second, learning through direct experience. And so the idea is that what happens to us affects how we behave, right? So if we are victims of violence, we may learn to be violent ourselves. We may normalize it. Oh, what's wrong with hitting people? I get hit all the time at home. What's the matter with it? And then lastly is learning via differential reinforcement. And so Burgess and Akers, a couple of authors, studied essentially how people learn to become criminals. And their basic conclusion is that people learn to become criminal when that behavior is rewarded. And well, how does that happen? We know that people place the most weight or the most value in the opinions of people who are most important to us. Okay, it goes back to differential association. If people important to you reward your criminal behavior, you will be more likely to become a criminal. So if you hang around with people who are criminals and their behavior, your bad behavior, gets positively reinforced in that subculture you live in, then chances are you're going to adapt it. Now, this is a pretty good model that's used to explain how street gangs recruit and socialize new members into their lifestyle. You know, if you want to be a member of a gang, you've got to please the gang. And if you're pleasing the gang, they're going to want you. They're going to give you the respect that you're looking for. All right. And so Bandura, in this same vein, argues for 5 instigators of learned violent behavior. One is unpleasant experiences, like having been attacked or threatened yourself. The second is incentive, and that is to say you receive rewards for aggression. The third is modeling. You are observing people's attitude and you are adapting it yourself. So you see one kid beat up another kid at school, and you decide, okay, this is all right, and then you start to model that behavior. Seeing others carry out instructions for violence is one way of learning violent behavior. And then lastly is this delusional belief that violence is necessary, okay, to solve your problems. All right. Lastly, we'll talk just briefly here about personality theories. I'm not a big fan of personality theories because, well, I'll explain why in just a second. But so here are just some of the topics that are studied. Are there personality differences between criminals and non-criminals? Well, there might be, depending on the crime, okay? If it comes to shoplifting, maybe some people do it for the thrills, but for the most part, people shoplift for small amounts of money. I think most people shoplift to make enough money to buy drugs, sort of nowadays. Do certain personality types make one more likely to offend? Is a type A personality more likely to offend than a type B? Is a type A personality really actually a thing? Do we need to get the Myers-Briggs out and say, okay, who are the criminals and who are the non-criminals? Do personality characteristics predict recidivism? In other words, is there a connection between your personality and your likelihood of committing a crime once you've already gotten out of jail for committing a previous crime? That's what recidivism is. And most importantly, and I think probably one I'm most interested in, was how does personality interact with situational characteristics to cause crime? Because that's interesting. We're going to read chapters from a book called Code of the Street. And what we'll find is that most of the people who live in quote-unquote bad neighborhoods don't commit crimes, and they don't like crime, and they see it as bad, and they don't want it as part of their lifestyle. And so but we also know that crime is very high in these neighborhoods. And so the idea is, what is it about some people in this neighborhood that keeps them from committing crimes, while other people in this neighborhood have a high propensity to commit crime? Is it a personality, or is it their age, or is it their gender, or is it whether they've got a disability or something? I don't know. These are the kinds of research questions they're pursuing. All right. So while I like psychological theories of crime, here's my biggest concern about them and why I think we have to push on to understand more. And the number one issue here, and I'll just grab my little thing here and circle it, is that psychology focuses almost exclusively on individuals. But here's what we know already from studying 4 chapters of criminology this semester, and that is that crime varies significantly by race, age, ethnicity, gender, and what we're going to get to a little bit later on, geography. Okay? It varies by very broad social categories. And by focusing only on the individual, we have to conclude that, well, given the crime rates we see by race and ethnicity and gender and age, that everybody within that group must have a propensity to this psychological disposition. So, for example, if we take personality theories, to explain crime, you would need to conclude that people of one race have the same personality, or that people who live in one neighborhood, or people of one age cohort all have the same personality, and that's not true. So what we really need to do as we move on to chapter 5 is we must focus on the group level. We're going to take a lot of these psychological concepts and recognize that they have a lot to say, like attachment theory. Great idea. Learning theory. We know people learn how to be criminals. They're not born bad. We're going to take some of these ideas, but also think about how they may vary depending upon whether or not the person in question lives in a good neighborhood or a bad neighborhood, or whether or not they have a lot of friends or no friends at all. All right. You guys take care, and I'll see you in chapter 5.